Hello, my future YouTubers. Romanian TV, aka Vee, has a question for socialists. A legitimate question towards socialists, one might say. Take it away, Vee.
So I have a legit question towards socialists and communists. Not people that I label as such, but people who self-identify as these two ideologies. People who go on Twitter with the hammer and sickle in their bios, people who have the black and red flag, people that legitimately call themselves anarchists. I understand a lot of things. Like, I understand that the ideology is about seizing the means of production, abolishing private, not personal property. I understand these things. But what I don't understand is that despite the fact that the ideology is tailored to fight against the wealthy, the bourgeoisie, the 1%, why is it that you guys have a special place in hell? Like, the thing that you hate the most right now seems to be the landowners. Like, this is what I genuinely do not understand. And you don't even discriminate. Like, you do not discriminate, from my personal experience, between a landowner that is a millionaire and he's got an entire company that rents out property versus a landowner that just has one apartment.
So I feel like I should talk about this here before he gets too deep into it. The reason why a lot of the real reason why a lot of online lefties talk so much shit about landlords is LARPing. The kill all landlords, that whole rhetoric is 100% just, well, 95% LARPing. But the reason why socialists oppose landlords so strongly is that they're a group of people who have who perform no labor, yet extract a significant amount of wealth from society. They own or they control a commodity that every single human being on the planet needs. And especially in our current time, most landlords act like they are immune to economic downturns, i.e., the number of landlords who are crying about not receiving rent when, what is it now, 36 million, upwards of 40 million people have filed for unemployment, have lost their jobs or been laid off or what have you. I mean, landlords sometimes run apartment complexes by hiring, keeping the grounds clean, and doing basic duties. So, yes, some landlords do that. And they should be compensated for the labor they do keeping up the complex or keeping up a home if they, if they own one or more homes and they do the property management themselves, if they clean it up, if they do maintenance, that kind of thing. But they shouldn't receive income simply for owning the building. I'm not going to pay $2,000 a month to a property manager just to, occasionally unclog my toilet or replace a faucet or what have you. That's not a reasonable situation. But I'm forced to pay, $1,100, $2,000, whatever your rent or mortgage is, to a landowner or a bank or what have you, because owning a home or having a home, whether it's a house or an apartment, whatever, is necessary for survival. I mean, yes, Maddie, that is the system we currently live in, but that doesn't mean it's a good system, and it's one we should definitely try to change.
I have not seen this discrimination.
And in regards to landlords over other people, it's simply that landlords extract wealth because of a commodity that only they have that not only they have access to, but that everybody needs. So and moreover, it's not a perishable or it's not a commodity that requires special treatment like food or water. Land is land. owning land is a fiction. It's a social construct. You can't point to ownership. You can claim you have ownership based on a piece of paper, but that ownership likely comes from people, generations, decades, centuries ago, coming in and either just taking over land that had no human inhabitants, or taking land from the previous inhabitants.
Maybe that is, but I personally haven't seen it. No, during the last couple of months, I see this burning hatred on Twitter, and even on Facebook, people are encouraging others not to pay their rent, and they're trying to organize people to gather up to force others not to pay their rent. And it's like, do you understand that you're literally playing into the hands of the millionaires by doing this? I'll explain in a bit. But first of all, let's...
Yes, please do explain, V.
Look at the difference between landowners, and maybe you can give me a solution to the problem that I'm going to propose. Because believe it or not all landowners are born equal. And I will give you the example of my aunt. And I know most of you will say, well, it's a cherry pick example, but I think it's such a common example that almost...
I know what he's gonna say here. I haven't watched this video at all, but I know what he's gonna say here. Something about how his aunt was owned a house and she moved to an apartment or bought another house and rented the house to someone at a reasonable or below market rate, blah, 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 blah. Yes, there are millions of landlords like that. They're not as bad as the big corporate ones who own, dozens of apartments, hundreds of apartments, or, several apartment buildings or what have you. They're still extracting wealth through no labor. And it's a failure of our economic system if older people have to rent out their house in order to make ends meet.
Everyone that listens to this video probably knows a person in their life that is in the same situation as my aunt. So my aunt starts off with a one-room apartment, a very tiny apartment that I presented on this channel, a communist matchbox apartment, like we like to call them here. And when she married my uncle, she moved into his house. So now she has a different place where she lives, and she has an extra apartment. What should she do with it? Should she just keep it? No, she decides to rent it out at the minimum price per market, so that usually students that come into my town from abroad and want to study at university can have a cheap and affordable place to stay. And she uses that extra money in order to pay the utilities at her uncle. Now, the question is why doesn't she sell the apartment? Why does she rent it? Well, it's because she doesn't know how the future is going to be like. For example, if the relationship with my uncle would...
Yeah, and that's all cool, and I understand your aunt is a saint and just totally an angel among women who wanted to make sure that she would be protected in the future and blah, 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 blah. The fact of the matter is that she is still expropriating wealth from people who need a place to live. Is she as bad as Mel Foster or one of these other major retail companies? No, obviously not. But it's still a bad system. Not all landlords are bad people. In fact, I would probably argue that most landlords are good people. But they are participating in, they are taking part in a bad system. And by perpetuating that bad system, they are harming society. This is why socialists are so hard against landlords, because like CEOs, like business owners, they expropriate wealth from the laborers, from the workers, without contributing any labor in return. The difference is that for landlords, people need a place to live. They need a home. But you don't need a Starbucks. You don't need well, I need a computer because I'm terminally online and hopelessly addicted to the internet and video games. But that's my point. Those are commodities that not everyone needs to survive. Everyone needs a home, a dwelling of some sort to survive. And so when you make it a commodity, when you make it something that is only available if you can afford it, you're essentially putting a paywall between you're putting a paywall around survival. And I don't think that's a good thing. Maybe I'm the weird one. But I don't think we should put a paywall around simply surviving.
Done for the worst and she would want to divorce, she would be out of a home. So she keeps that in that particular situation. Or my uncle had a previous marriage. So if he passes away, then the people that, his relatives and the family members from the other marriage could claim in the will that they want that apartment. So again, like my
non sequitur, that's what fucking wills are for. And I don't know what the laws are like in Romania. They could be fucked up. So this is why I think we should decommodify food. However, food is a lot more complicated because it's not something that just exists. You have to cultivate food, you have to cook food, you have to prepare food. So it's a little more complicated than landlords. But I mean, I agree, we should decommodify food as well. It should be, there should be a general basic allotment of good, nutritious food available to everyone. I'm not saying everyone should be able to just go to the local supermarket and take whatever food they want, but there should be essentially a ration for good, tasty, healthy food. And then however else we want to, I mean, for instance, in a market socialist economy where basic food and housing are decommodified, as an initial example, you would get a ration. I don't know exactly how we would handle it. It could either be a ration of food is delivered to you daily or weekly, or you just get a SNAP card like we have now that would allow you to purchase basic foodstuffs. But then anything beyond that, that's just it. In a market economy, there's still money. In a market socialist economy, the idea is everyone gets a basic amount of food necessary to stay alive. Whether that's, a loaf of bread every couple of days and some milk and an assortment of fruits and vegetables, or whether that's, like I said, a ration card that allows you to only purchase these basic staples, whatever it is. But then you would also work, and through working, be able to, yes, but food stamps are only for people who are below a certain income level, and the income level where it gets cut off is often not enough to survive with everything else that's commodified in the US. So imagine a system like food stamps with a more limited variety of things it can purchase. Because right now I can take a SNAP card, that's EBT in my state, and go buy a Red Bull and a Snickers and pay for it with the SNAP card. I don't think Red Bull and Snickers should be part of a, basic decommodified diet. I think that those should be those would be luxuries. And if they're luxuries, then they have to be paid for out of your luxury budget, whatever that is. Even if it, because again, even in a market socialist economy, people will still have to work. Is that like the annual income? Because I think it's a little bit higher than that, but even so, 1.3K is just over $100 a month. I don't know anyone who can live 1.3K month. Okay. I mean, is that? And I know it's different depending on your situation, but let's see. So yeah, and this is the thing. It's very complicated about how you qualify for it. I'm talking about a situation where everyone gets a snap card with a minimum amount of that is only usable on these basic, necessary healthy foods. And then if you want anything else, like chocolate, like an energy bar, like an energy drink, whatever, if you want something like that, then you have to spend the money you earn at your job. Well, that's just it, Maddie. I'm talking about a system vastly different from, well, not vastly different, but significantly different from our own, where we've decommodified certain things that should not have been commodified in the first place, like basic food and housing. And again, because the idea is to make it universal, so that if something happens and you no longer have your job, like you're injured or the business you work for goes under for some reason, that you're not suddenly starving because you were making good money, but now you're not.
Aunt could be homeless. So she's keeping this particular place for the future. And I know so many people that do the same. Like they have a place, they get married, they move somewhere else, and now they have an extra place that they rent out. So remember when I said that when you do rent strikes or these types of, like, you encourage people to not discriminate.
Ah, yes. Commodification means competition. That's why there's so many different brands of different foods that are all owned by the same 4 companies. Competition is good if it's real competition. The problem is that our current economic system creates the illusion of competition when it's really what is it called? A monopsony? Monopsony? Monopsony. Monopsony is a market condition where there's only one buyer. Oh, okay, no, not a monopsony. Sorry, I misremembered the term. But we have a system here where there's like 4 or 5 companies that own the vast majority of food and drink companies. So you look at a shelf and you see Lay's and you see Fritos and you see Cheetos and you see Pringles and you think, oh, I have so much choice. There's so much competition. When really it's just like 1 or 2 companies putting those out. This dude's about to argue that because sometimes lower middle class people own a property and rent it, that rent strikes are inherently evil. A source on the... Absolutely. How many companies make food in America? So, let's see. We've got Nestle. There's... Let's see. I know I've seen this. Here we go. Yeah. PepsiCo owns Lay's, Doritos. Go away, ad. No, I don't want notifications from Business Insider. I've told you this before. So Pepsi owns Quaker, which makes Life and Captain Crunch. And let's see, can I get a bigger version of this so that it's actually readable? So this is like, certainly there are brands outside of these, and each store, especially if it's a national chain, each chain store will have its own brand, its own store brand. But those are often just rebranded versions of the name brand. Are you talking to me or Maddie, Magmill? Okay. Yeah, that means that when you go to the store and you see, do I want a Crunch Bar or do I want Nerds or Laffy Taffy? You know, or if you're looking for something more substantial, do I want a DiGiorno pizza or Jack's pizza or do I want Hot Pockets? This looks like competition, but it all goes back to the same company. It all goes back to the same giant pot. And the fact of the matter is that these companies all work together to maintain this system. So that even though it gives us, the consumers, the illusion of competition, that competition doesn't really exist. It's even worse for ISPs. It doesn't tell it. This shows that the vast majority of brands that you purchase are owned by these 10 companies. That's exactly what this is showing you. That when you go to the store and you try to decide between Sprite, Mellow Yellow, and Coca-Cola, it actually, that's not competition because it's all going back to Coca-Cola. Now, yes, you can choose between Barks, Mug, and what's another fucking root beer? A&W. Let's see, Barks is here. Let's see, who owns A&W? I know it's a Sprite. Yeah, Mug is up here under PepsiCo. And then... I don't actually see A&W on this. Possibly because it's just so fucking pixelated. But yeah, the parent company essentially precludes the type of competition that capitalist apologists like to pretend exists. Yeah, that's exactly the point. None of these people are in competition with each other. They all basically have agreed that they all have their own areas and will stay out of each other's ways. So even though this gives the illusion of competition, all these different choices, it's all ultimately the same thing. This is why you hear a friend of my dad's claims even to this day that Natty Light is just Bud Light recanned, and that is one thing I don't agree with because Natty Light is fucking awful. I mean, Bud Light is also awful, but it's not as awful as Natty. But there is a brand. What is it? Doc Soda is just repackaged name brand sodas. Let's say 2 or 3 of these companies get together and say, let's all raise prices 10% this year, and suddenly what was affordable becomes less so, and yes, that's illegal, but also hard as shit to prove. Exactly. Yeah. But that's just it. You can choose Pepsi over Coke, but they're not actually in competition with each other. You have this illusion of choice. And yes, you're purchasing Pepsi doesn't help Coke, but it doesn't hurt Coke either. That's the point. That's the idea.
Discriminate. Like, literally, if you happen to be in a place and you're paying rent, just stop paying it. Doesn't matter if it's a company, doesn't matter if it's a person like my aunt, just stop paying it. The reason you're helping the millionaires is because what would happen if all the rent just dries up? Eventually, especially with the economic crisis coming up, my aunt might actually have to sell that place because she's going to go, well, like we can't afford to pay the bills, we can't afford to pay our mortgage, so I have to sell my apartment and help out. Who do you think is going to buy the apartment? Seriously, like who do you think is going to buy the apartment during the middle of an economic crisis? Is it going to be your average Joe?
Boy, I thought his arguments when he debated Vosh were bad, but yeah, of course the wealthy people are going to benefit in an economic decline. They're able to weather economic declines because they have money to lean back on. Like trying to say that millionaires are going to benefit more from an economic decline than poor people. I mean, unless we get some real class consciousness going here, boys, then you're basically saying that you're saying water is wet here. Yeah. Wealthy people aren't hurt as badly by economic decline and tend to benefit more, like in many situations, because they have the resources to take advantage of opportunities.
No, it's going to be millionaires and wealthy people that already have businesses where they just loan property to other people. They're the ones that are going to get very cheaply new property during this economic crisis. And what do you think happens with the person that's having the rent if the owner has to sell?
It's almost like the landlord-tenant relationship is inherently imbalanced, and we should try to correct that. I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying here, that many millionaires are going to have the opportunities to snap up property at cheap prices because these part-time landlords like your aunt have to sell because they can't afford to hold on to the property. I don't disagree with that situation at all. But I don't think it is I don't think it's a good thing. And I think it's a problem with our system, not a problem with rent strikes or the like.
It's a lot more easy to have a conversation.
Yes, yeet the parasites, exactly.
With my aunt and explain to her, look, I can't pay for the next 2 months because of the shutdown. I know, like, can we come to an agreement? Can we come to an understanding? It's a lot more easy to do that than to come to an understanding with a big corporation that just deals with leasing.
Right, which is why the first step of the rent strike was generally to talk to your landlord and see if there's something that can be arranged, because if you have even the progenitor of the current rent strike 2020 movement, Joshua Collins, has said he has a cool landlord, he likes him, he's willing to work with him, so he is not participating in the rent strike. Now, I'm not going to go into the good or bads about Joshua Collins right now. I'm simply explaining that even someone who earnestly believes in the rent strike is not participating because they have one of these quote-unquote cool landlord who is willing to work with him. And that is what should be done in this situation. But then there are the other situations, like I remember reading a story about a guy who a landlord sent out an email to all of the tenants in his 6 or 8 apartment buildings, and the idiot failed to make it a blind send. So every single tenant got the email addresses of every single other tenant, and that landlord is now dealing with a tenants union, which is a good thing. I mean, that's the kind of landlords we're railing against. The ones who own way more properties than is even reasonable in our current economic situation. And those who take advantage of poor people and people who need a place to live. Tenants unions, just like unions in every other place where they're relevant, are good things and should be encouraged. They help equalize the power imbalance between the landlord and the tenant. There's a difference between striking for revolution and striking for improvements of material conditions. True, yes. I can't really articulate the difference, but I understand inherently that there is a difference there.
Renting property to people. Not to mention, like, I never understood, like, this level of disgust specifically for the landowner. Like, this level of disgust doesn't exist for the banks, for example.
Yes, it does. It's just that banks do not. Most socialists I know have quite a bit of disgust for banks and other financial institutions. It's just that most banks are part of the general capitalist system and not as bad as the wealth expropriation of landlords, right?
Look, I'm looking at the people with the hammer and sickle. Like, I'm pretty sure now that I bring it up, you all hate the banks, all of you. I'm 100% convinced. But you do not vocalize that unless I mention it. Like, you constantly vocalize the disdain towards the landowner. Again, you do not discriminate between a private individual and a big corporation. And you do not have the same disdain to the banks.
So if you're trying to improve conditions, your scope is smaller, so less participation is required. Striking revolution requires one big union. Okay, yeah. Yeah. This is why, like, the tenants union I mentioned earlier, that the one landlord, like, that is a group of people who are all probably going to achieve greater material conditions in that area. But you need greater solidarity if you want to achieve more revolutionary change. Absolutely. And yes, anarcho-syndicalism indeed.
Which do the exact same stuff, because it's like, oh, the landowner is a parasite. Like, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything. He just sits there and he's renting a property and it's just making him money. What do the bankers do? Isn't it like the same thing? Like, they just give you money and then you have to pay them extra. But you know, like, it's with the bankers, it's a lot more complicated. I'm just overly simplifying it to the bare bones of what their profession should actually be like. But like, all the people that hate the landowners, they do not understand. First of all, they're not making that much money.
Oh my god. I hate this fucking argument. I've seen so many bootlicker landlord apologists make this argument. They're not making that much money. Okay. You know, a petty panhandler who just goes around and, like, lifts people's wallets doesn't make that much money, but it's still wrong. You know, is he as bad as, like, a Madoff? Bernie Madoff? The pyramid scheme guy who got busted several years ago. Is he as bad as the Enron people? No. You know, is he as bad as someone like Joel Osteen? No. But they're still bad. They're still participating in a bad system. Anyone can join the IWW, Dodge.
And secondly, you have to also take care of the property.
I mean, we're in Iowa, so it's not a huge help because right to work states, but definitely join the IWW. I did. Unfortunately, I was stupid and joined after I lost my job, but you know.
Property that you are renting out. Like, for example, my aunt is actually considering not to rent out the property anymore because of the property damages that are happening. Like, there were so many cases where they would rent out to a couple of students and they would have a big party there, and then the neighbors start complaining, and then the certain damages can appear, like the washing machine could be ruined, or someone dropped the television, or, you know, the walls need repainting because there were literally footprints on the walls. You know, like that, those types of things, which again the owner has to fix. Now, I know it's really easy to say, well, all owners are evil, owners don't do that. It's like, well, my aunt does it. And
this is, again, an issue with rent. In my opinion, I could be wrong about the sociological causes of this, but I feel like this is an issue where, well, I don't own it. It's not my responsibility. There's a lot of people who look at renting as just a temporary property, and so they don't need to take care of it. Or the other big issue is people who don't have time to take care of it. People who have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet don't have time to take care of property like a proper homeowner should. And since a lot of those people tend to go into cheap or low-income housing, those tend to not be the best repaired anyway, and things get worse. We're on the tenants damaged my carpet, so the system of exploitation is okay argument. Yeah, this is definitely trash. Yeah, I know a lot of people who... I'm not going to see a safety deposit anyway. I think the general consensus is if you... I think the general consensus if you live in a place more than like 2 or 3 years, kiss the deposit goodbye.
When you want to have like this general strike and force people not to pay, which by the way doesn't happen in my country, but I'm seeing it on the internet and I'm thinking, well, if my aunt was in New York, she would get problems with these people. And not to mention, like, you are purposefully hurting the relationship between the tenant and the owner. Because it's one thing when the tenant goes to the owner and tries to have a heart-to-heart conversation and says, look, this is a little bit of a difficult time for me. I've been laid out of a job because of the quarantine. I can't pay for the next 2 months. Usually, like, you can come to an agreement, you can come to an understanding. They're human beings as well. They understand this. But if you're like going to be a twat and you're going to be like, screw you, I'm not paying, lulu, what's you're going to do? The law is on my side. Like the law said, for the next couple of months I don't have to pay or whatever. Then the owner is going to be vindictive. And they're going to take advantage of that. Like sooner or later they're going to have you in a tight corner. And then the owner will say, well, lulu, what you gonna do? The law is on my side. So like the advice that you give to people in order to be spiteful towards their owners is a really bad advice. It's a lot better to try to negotiate, to try to communicate like human beings.
No, they usually can't come to an agreement because one person has all the power and the other is desperate. This is dumb as fuck. The tenant doesn't have agency by... Yeah. Again, most landlords are probably not like your aunt, V. Most landlords are going to be people who have multiple properties and could not care less about their tenants and would rather, oh, you're not going to pay? Get the fuck out. I'll find someone who can. I mean, these are extraordinary circumstances. These circumstances we're in now are why the rent strike has gained the traction it has. Because we have a greater ability to say, no, we're not going to pay because we can't afford it. We all lost our jobs or not getting paid or getting paid less. And we're not getting... And you can't evict us because they've closed those processes. So that gives us months, potentially, to build solidarity, to build the strength of the workers, the common people, in order to create a system, create a society where we do not have to deal with landlords. I mean, I don't think the rent strike is going to destroy the landlord class. I don't think it's going to get enough... I hope it does. But unfortunately, I'm pretty realistic and pragmatic in these situations, and I don't think it's going to, destroy the landlord class this time. But it does create that strength and solidarity, and there's no reason tenants unions that form in this time should go away. They should continue, and they should expand, and they should strengthen. And in that way, we can reduce the power of the landlord class and hopefully break its back in time.
But that's the thing, like, I...
Right, the point is to become better organized. And yeah... Like I said, part of the reason why I wanted to do this was I wanted to see if he was any better at arguing against an idea than he was against Vosh, and he is not.
I don't think you guys see the owner as a human being. Like that is literally the problem. And it's really fascinating, especially in Britain. Like in Britain, the problem isn't the...
It's not that we don't see the owners as human beings, it's that we're arguing against the system they take part in. Like, you can hate landlords and love your individual land. You can hate landlords as a class and hate individual landlords. or hate and landlords as a class and love your individual landlord. I mean, right? Hate the sin, love the sinner, that kind of thing. And again, we're not going all Maoist and trying to kill all landlords, despite what memers on the internet try to say. We're simply saying that their process of income, their wealth extraction, is wrong and needs to be fixed. And that if they want to continue making money, they can get a real job.
The landowners, the problem.
Oh yeah, it was, I think it was the first time he was on the Drunken Peasants. This was like a year ago. Not quite a year ago. And they argued about socialism and various things, and V just kept going off into anecdotal non sequiturs. It's a really good debate. Yeah, they shouldn't be killed, but their system of exploitation should be eliminated.
The problem is the foreigners. Racismus, absolutely. Like the people from Qatar, people from Saudi Arabia, people from China that are investing money into British property. And they're just buying stuff, and they're not renting it, they're not doing anything with it, they just have it. Why? So that in the future, when the market explodes, when there's a huge demand.
This isn't just an issue with foreigners, and this is an issue in just about every developed nation. This is why property in places like Seattle and LA and San Francisco is so ludicrously expensive. Is because these developers, not just foreign ones, but, I mean, some are foreign, but they're also domestic developers, who purchase property and then just let it sit empty until it gets to a price point that they can make enough money off of it.
And for property, then they can sell it. Those are the real problems. And you're not even talking about it. You're not even addressing it. Not to mention, like, how can you explain that a country like Britain, with negative birth rates, is having such high prices for property? Like, why is it that the price for property isn't going down? Because, like, if the previous generation managed to make do with X amount of houses, and the next generation is smaller in numbers than the previous one, why?
They are experiencing negative birth rates, but I'm pretty sure England is not experiencing negative population growth. Let's find out. UK population growth. 0.6% annual change. So they've gone up. Let's see. So 2017, 0.6. Yeah. Looks like there's still population growth. You know what that is? That's immigration, my friend. That's how many of these that's how many of these industrialized nations continue to grow their population, because yes, we do have negative birth rates. I mean, look at that. The three of the wealthiest, most powerful nations on earth all have positive population growth. But let's look at UK birth rate. I think this is the figure I want. See. Actually, I mean, I assume 1.79 births per woman is a positive growth rate. But I could... No, not necessarily. But anyway, the point is that there are more people in England now than there was a generation ago. So they need more houses. So more homes are built, but then a number of those homes sit empty because developers sit on them as tax breaks, or until they're worth enough that it's worth selling or renting them.
Is it then that the number of housing, which remains the same, doesn't become cheaper? You know, you need to ask yourself that question. I can't give it to you due to YouTube's terms of service, but you figure it out. You try to connect the dots and figure out, like, why is the reason that... Because I get, like, why a lot of leftists, I think I get it, are pissed off at landowners. Because a lot of them are students or people that have to pay rent, and they do not understand.
Leftists are all just white college students who don't know their privilege. Fuck off, V. The reason why leftists have been painted as academics is so that the anti-intellectual right can paint them as out-of-touch elites who don't know what real people want. Socialists and anarchists have always been members of the working class. They've always fought for the working class.
Like, why do I have to pay, or whatever? But here's the thing, like, if it wasn't for the owner renting, if people would just stop renting property and just hoard it, and why would people hoard it? For two reasons. Number one, they don't know the future. So when they're in a financial pickle, then they sell it. And usually it takes like an economic crisis or something to convince them to sell it. Or they keep it for their children. Like, if I have two properties, right? What do I do with them? Well, when I have kids, my kid already has a property.
Yeah, I agree, Dodge. This is boring. He's just saying the same shit over and over again. I expected a little more spice from V. Jeez. Yeah, landlords are bad. In some respects, they're worse than other bourgeois people like bankers or CEOs or the like. The issue with landlords, just as a final capstone on this, is that they own property and expropriate wealth without performing any labor. So that's why lefties rail against them so much. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to like, share, and leave a comment because it helps me. Subscribe and ring that bell to help you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.